Hey friends, Pastor Bill Walden here with Build Up the Church. This is a devotional word for June 22nd, 2024. This is out of the book of Acts chapter 7. And here in Acts chapter 7, we see Stephen standing before the rulers of Israel, the religious rulers. And he has been brought up on false charges, and they are interrogating him. And they asked him in verse 1, "Are these things true, these things that you have been saying?" And so Stephen, very interestingly, treats them with a lot of respect. Of course, we would expect that. But he doesn't really defend himself as much as he defends the gospel and tells the story that they already knew but had become blind to. They had become blind to their repeated rejections of God and the people that God had sent. And Stephen eventually is going to lead it up to the fact that they rejected Jesus. But in this section today, verses 23 down to 34, he is talking about Moses. And Moses was, of course, one of the Old Testament heroes to the Jewish people. But we see here how Moses was chosen by God, but tried to do the job that God had for him on his own power and in his own timing. And this is a really important lesson for all of us. God may call you to something, but it has to be done according to his timing and according to his power and his direction, not our own. So we pick up the story here in Acts chapter 7, verse 23. Now when he was 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brethren, the children of Israel. We are already told in the story that Moses had been born in Egypt. Pharaoh was killing all the male Hebrew children, and so his mother put him out in a little raft in the Nile River, and he was retrieved by the household of Pharaoh and raised in Pharaoh's household. And he grew in favor and stature in Egypt, and he learned the ways of Egypt, and he was chosen by God. But it came into his heart, in verse 23, to visit his brethren, the children of Israel. Moses had a keen sense that he was called to deliver them out of slavery. And seeing one of them suffer a wrong, he defended and avenged him who was oppressed and struck down the Egyptian. So an Egyptian was oppressing, probably beating a Hebrew. Moses probably looked to the left and looked to the right and then saw that he had the opportunity, and he killed the Egyptian, buried him in the sand. Verse 25, for he supposed that his brethren would have understood that God would deliver them by his hand, but they did not understand. One of the key words that we see in Acts chapter 7, verse 25 is he supposed. He thought that his Hebrew brethren would understand somehow automatically that he was sent to deliver them from the slavery that they were enduring in Egypt, but they did not understand. So that was wrong on his part, that supposition. Verse 26, on the next day he appeared to two of them as they were fighting and tried to reconcile them, saying, men, you are brethren, why are you doing wrong to one another? So he's trying to create peace between two Hebrew men. Verse 27, but he who did his neighbor wrong pushed him away, saying, who made you a ruler and a judge over us? Do you want to kill me as you did the Egyptian yesterday? So apparently what Moses thought was a secret was not a secret. The news was out, and he was known to be a murderer, and a murderer of an Egyptian civil servant. Verse 29. Then at this saying, Moses fled and became a dweller in the land of Midian and had two sons. Moses ran. He ran into the desert. He acquires a wife there. He acquires children there. He's learning how to be a shepherd. He's also, interestingly enough, learning about desert life, which would come in handy later because God is going to use him later. But God will only use Moses on God's timetable and in God's prompting and in God's ways. God was not going to deliver the children of Israel from slavery by Moses going around killing people. There needed to be something much more powerful than what Moses could produce on his own. Verse 30, when 40 years had passed, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire in a bush in the wilderness of Mount Sinai. When Moses saw it, he marveled at the sight. As he drew near to observe, the voice of the Lord came to him, saying, I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses trembled and dared not look. A great deal of humility has been worked into Moses' life at this point. And the Lord said to him, take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. And so Moses has this amazing encounter with God. And then God tells him in verse 34, I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their groaning, and I have come down to deliver them. And now come, I will send you to Egypt. God had to wait, if you will, or Moses had to wait. They both had to wait until Moses was really ready. Moses was favored by God. His life was spared from death. The Pharaoh was killing the Hebrew baby boys. He was actually raised in Pharaoh's household, rose to prominence, but had a sense that there was a calling on his life, but then tried to fulfill that calling under his own power and in his own time. He was found out to be a murderer, and what started out as a supposedly courageous deliverer turned into a fearful man who fled from his calling. He had to be humbled in the desert, in the backside of the desert, actually, the Bible says. As if the desert weren't humble enough, he had the backside of the desert. And he probably forgot his calling, or maybe not, who knows. But he's been reduced to nothing, but God's going to raise him up greatly to become a mighty deliverer. And this is what has to happen in the life of God's people if we are going to be used by God. I would even say if we're going to be greatly used by God. A.W. Tozer has a quote that I often quote. He says, "It's doubtful that God can use a man greatly until he's hurt him deeply." There needs to be a great humbling that happens in the life of God's servants so that we don't go around like Moses thinking we can deliver a people by killing off the enemies one at a time. God still had a calling on Moses' life, but Moses had to come to the end of himself before he could be something useful in God's hands. And so he did come to the end of himself. He saw the burning bush. He wouldn't even look at it. And he tries to disagree with God. If you read the story in the Old Testament, he says, "Who am I that you would send me? I don't speak well in any number of things. They're not going to believe that you sent me." He tried to get out of it. Before he was pushing himself forward. Now he doesn't feel qualified at all. And he finally realizes that apart from God, he's not qualified. But with God, he's qualified. There's an old saying in church life, God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. And Moses was now qualified. He became nothing in his own eyes, and now he was very usable, and God sent him back to deliver the children of Israel from Egyptian slavery. So how does that apply to you? I don't know. Take some time to think about it. Take some time to pray about it. And those are some things to consider. Thanks for watching.